Worry has a way of creeping into the mind quietly, settling into the heart like an uninvited guest that refuses to leave. It starts as a thought, a question, a what if, and before long it grows into a heavy weight pressing down on the soul. You wake up with it. You carry it through the day. You lie down at night with it still whispering in your ear. Worry tells you that nothing is happening, that heaven is silent, that you are alone in the struggle. But the truth you must hear today, deep in your spirit, beyond your emotions, beyond what your eyes can see, is this: stop worrying. God is working. There are moments in life when it feels as though everything is paused except your pain. You pray, yet the situation looks the same. You believe, yet the door remains closed. You trust, yet the answer seems delayed. And in that space between promise and fulfillment, worry tries to take control. It tells you that God has forgotten you. It convinces you that time is running out. It pressures you to panic, to rush, to force solutions that God never asked you to create. But what worry does not understand is that God does his best work in silence, in process, in timing that does not match human expectation. Worry is one of the most common struggles of the human heart, yet it is also one of the clearest signs that we are carrying something we were never designed to hold. It settles into the mind slowly, often disguised as responsibility, concern, or preparation. But over time, it reveals its true nature by draining peace, joy, and strength. Worry promises safety, as if thinking about every possible outcome will somehow protect us from pain. But in reality, it only multiplies fear. It keeps the body tense and the spirit restless, working endlessly without producing a single solution. This is because worry is a burden that does not belong to us, it belongs to God. Human beings were never created to control the future. We live moment by moment, limited by time, energy, and understanding. God, however, stands outside of time. He sees the end from the beginning, not as a guess, but as a certainty. When we worry, we are attempting to take responsibility for outcomes that only God can manage. It is like trying to carry the weight of the ocean in our hands. No matter how hard we try, it will overwhelm us. The strain we feel when we worry is not a sign that the situation is too big. It is a sign that we are trying to play a role that was never ours. Worry often disguises itself as care. We tell ourselves that we are worried because we care deeply, because the situation matters, because the people involved are important to us. But caring and worrying are not the same thing. Caring leads us to prayer, trust, and action guided by wisdom. Worry leads us to fear, panic, and sleepless nights. Caring says, I will do what I can and trust God with the rest. Worry says, if I don't hold this together, everything will fall apart. At its core, worry assumes that God is either unable or unwilling to handle what concerns us, even if we would never say that out loud. The reason worry feels so heavy is because it demands constant attention. It loops the same thoughts over and over, replaying worst-case scenarios, magnifying problems, and shrinking hope. It pulls tomorrow's troubles into today, forcing us to suffer twice. Instead of allowing us to live in the present, worry keeps us trapped in an imagined future that has not happened and may never happen. God never intended for us to live this way. Grace is given one day at a time, not in bulk for every possible future. When we worry, we are trying to live in a future without the grace that God has reserved for that moment. There is also a spiritual danger in carrying worry for too long. It slowly shifts our trust. We may still pray, but deep inside we rely more on our own planning, our own backup options, and our own ability to control outcomes. Worry makes us believe that if we think hard enough, prepare enough, or stress enough, we can guarantee a better result. But peace does not come from preparation alone. It comes from dependence. God invites us to cast our cares on him, not because he wants us to be careless, but because he knows we will break under the weight if we try to carry them ourselves. Releasing worry is not pretending that problems do not exist. It is acknowledging that they do exist and choosing to place them in God's hands instead of clenching them in our own. It is an act of humility, a quiet confession that says, I am limited, but you are not. This kind of surrender does not weaken us, it strengthens us. When we stop carrying what belongs to God, we become free to carry what he has actually assigned to us: love, obedience, faith, and hope. Every time worry rises, it presents a choice. We can either grip the burden tighter or release it in trust. Letting go may feel uncomfortable at first because worry has convinced us that control equals safety. But true safety is found not in control, but in trust. God has proven his faithfulness time and time again, often in ways we did not expect and on timelines we did not choose. Looking back, many of the things we once worried about are now testimonies of God's provision. When we finally understand that worry is a burden we were never meant to carry, we begin to breathe differently. Our prayers change. Our perspective shifts. We stop asking, what if everything goes wrong? And start declaring, even if it does, God is still in control. Peace does not mean the absence of trouble. It means the presence of trust. And in that place of trust, worry loses its power because the burden has been placed exactly where it belongs, in the hands of God. One of the hardest challenges in a life of faith is learning to trust God when nothing seems to be changing. There are seasons when prayers feel unanswered, doors remain closed, and the situation looks exactly the same day after day. In those moments, it is easy to assume that God is inactive or distant, but the truth is far different. God is often doing his greatest work in the very moments when it appears that nothing is happening. His silence is not proof of his absence. It is often evidence of his careful, intentional preparation. Human understanding is limited to what can be seen, measured, and explained. We look for visible signs of progress and immediate results. God, however, works on a level that goes far beyond what the human eye can detect. While we focus on outcomes, he focuses on alignment. While we watch the surface, he works in the depths. Conversations are being arranged. Hearts are being softened. Circumstances are being shifted. And timing is being perfected in ways we may never fully know. Just because we do not see movement does not mean there is no motion. There are countless moments in life when God works quietly, almost invisibly. Like seeds planted beneath the soil, his work begins out of sight. Roots must grow before fruit can appear. Strength must develop before responsibility increases. If growth were visible at every stage, it would invite impatience and pride. God often hides the process to protect it. What he is forming in secret is meant to last, not just impress for a moment. The unseen season is where endurance is built and faith is refined. It is natural to become restless when answers seem delayed. Waiting can feel uncomfortable, especially when the pressure of uncertainty weighs heavily on the heart. Yet waiting is not wasted when God is involved. In the waiting, God is often removing what would harm us later. He is closing doors that look good, but are not right. He is rearranging paths so that when the moment comes, everything fits together in a way that could not have happened sooner. If God moved too quickly, we might step into something unprepared and be overwhelmed by the very blessing we asked for. There is also a deeper purpose in God's hidden work. When the breakthrough finally arrives, there will be no doubt that it was God who brought it to pass. When human effort reaches its limit, God's power becomes unmistakable. Silence strips away false confidence and teaches dependence. It reminds us that faith is not based on what we can prove, but on who we trust. In those quiet moments, trust grows roots that are strong enough to withstand future storms. Many people give up too soon because they mistake silence for rejection. They stop praying, stop believing, or stop expecting anything to change. Yet often the greatest shifts happen just beyond the point where patience is tested the most. God's timing is precise, not random. He knows when you are ready, when the situation is ready, and when the outcome will bring him the greatest good and you the greatest growth. What feels like delay is often divine accuracy. When you understand that God is working even when you see nothing, your perspective begins to change. You stop measuring progress only by visible results and start trusting the unseen hand guiding every detail. Anxiety gives way to confidence, not because the situation has changed, but because your trust has. You learn to rest in the assurance that God has not forgotten you, overlooked you, or abandoned the process. Even now, in ways beyond your awareness, he has moved pieces into place. Faith is not the absence of questions. It is the presence of trust in the middle of uncertainty. Knowing that God is working behind the scenes allows you to keep moving forward without panic, to keep praying without frustration, and to keep believing without evidence. In time, what was hidden will be revealed, and what was silent will make sense. Until then, the call is simple but powerful. Trust the work you cannot see, because God is always faithful to finish what he begins. There comes a point in every life when control begins to slip through our fingers. Plans fail, timelines collapse, and certainty disappears. It is in these moments that fear often rises because we have been taught directly or indirectly that control equals safety. When we know what is happening and how it will end, we feel secure. But faith does not grow in spaces where everything is predictable. Faith is not built on certainty, it is formed in surrender. When control is released, trust has room to grow. The desire for control is deeply human. We plan to avoid pain, we organize to prevent chaos, and we prepare to protect ourselves from disappointment. None of these are wrong in themselves, but when control becomes the foundation of our peace, it turns into a burden. The moment something unexpected happens, peace collapses. This is why worry often shows up when control is lost. Worry is the mind's attempt to regain control over what cannot be controlled. It convinces us that if we think enough, plan enough, or manage enough, we can secure the outcome. But faith calls us in a different direction. Surrender is often misunderstood as weakness or passivity, but in truth, it is an act of deep strength. Surrender does not mean giving up responsibility. It means recognizing limits. It is acknowledging that while we can do what is within our reach, the final outcome rests with God. Faith begins where human ability ends. When we surrender control, we are not stepping into chaos. We are stepping into God's care. We are choosing trust over anxiety, dependence over self-reliance. God rarely gives full explanations before asking for trust. If he revealed every step in advance, faith would not be necessary. We would rely on information rather than relationship. God desires trust, not because he withholds clarity, but because trust creates intimacy. When you trust someone, you do not need to know every detail. You need to know their character. Faith grows as we learn who God is through experience, not just through outcomes. Letting go of control can feel uncomfortable at first. It exposes vulnerability. It forces us to face the reality that we are not as powerful as we like to believe. But it is in this vulnerability that faith takes root. When there is nothing left to lean on, we discover that God has been steady all along. Control keeps us busy managing fear. Surrender frees us to receive peace. One drains the soul, the other restores it. Many people struggle with surrender because they fear disappointment. They worry that if they fully trust God and things do not turn out as expected, the pain will be unbearable. But surrender does not guarantee the absence of pain. It guarantees the presence of God in the pain. Faith does not promise easy paths. It promises faithful guidance. God does not always change the situation immediately, but he always provides strength to endure and wisdom to navigate what lies ahead. As control loosens, faith sharpens perception. You begin to notice God's presence in small moments, in quiet reassurance, in unexpected provision. You learn to measure success not only by outcomes, but by obedience. Faith matures when the heart learns to say, even if this does not go the way I hoped, I will still trust you. That kind of faith is not shaken by circumstances because it is anchored in God's character. Surrender is not a one-time decision. It is a daily practice. Each new challenge invites a fresh release of control. Each uncertainty offers another opportunity to trust. Over time, this repeated surrender builds a resilient faith, one that remains steady in change, calm in uncertainty, and hopeful in waiting. Control demands answers before peace arrives. Faith rests in God even when answers are still forming. When faith grows through surrender, life begins to shift. Worry loses its grip because control is no longer the source of security. Peace flows not from knowing what will happen, but from knowing who is in charge. In releasing control, the heart finds rest, and faith becomes stronger, deeper, and more enduring than certainty ever could. Waiting is one of the most misunderstood and challenging seasons in life. It often feels unproductive, uncomfortable, and unnecessary, especially when the desire for movement and progress is strong. When answers do not come quickly and situations remain unresolved, it is easy to assume that something is wrong or that God is withholding good things. But waiting is not a sign of punishment or neglect. In God's design, waiting is a powerful tool of preparation, shaping the heart and strengthening the spirit for what is to come. In a culture that values speed and instant results, waiting can feel like failure. We are conditioned to believe that progress must always be visible and immediate. Yet God's work rarely follows human timelines. He is not rushed, and he is not careless. Every season of waiting has purpose. While the outward circumstances may remain unchanged, inward transformation is taking place. Patience is being developed, endurance is being strengthened, and faith is being deepened in ways that could not happen through quick ands. Whereas waiting reveals what truly lives in the heart. When movement stops, motives surface. Trust is tested. In the quiet space where distractions are removed, reliance on God becomes clearer. If everything happened instantly, dependence on God would be shallow. Waiting stretches faith beyond comfort and teaches the soul to lean on God rather than outcomes. It is in these moments that character is refined and maturity begins to take shape. God often uses waiting to prepare us for the weight of what we're asking for. Blessings carry responsibility, and without preparation, even good things can become overwhelming. Strength must be built before increased responsibility is given. Wisdom must grow before influence expands. Waiting is God's way of ensuring that when the answer arrives, it does not crush us or lead us away from him. What feels like delay is often protection in disguise. There are also things that must be removed during seasons of waiting. Attitudes, habits, and expectations that would sabotage the future are gently exposed and reshaped. Waiting slows the pace enough for reflection and correction. It realigns desires and clarifies purpose. If God moved immediately, there would be no time for adjustment, and the outcome could be damaging rather than life-giving. Waiting gives space for transformation that cannot be rushed. The discomfort of waiting often leads people to take matters into their own hands. Impatience tempts us to force doors open, settle for less, or compromise values just to escape the stillness. But forced solutions often create deeper problems. God's preparation cannot be replaced by human effort. What he builds slowly is stable. What is rushed is fragile. Trusting the waiting process requires faith, but it prevents regret later. Waiting also strengthens trust in God's character rather than his gifts. When answers are delayed, the relationship is tested. Do we trust God only when he provides quickly, or do we trust him because he is faithful? Waiting shifts the focus from what we want to who God is. It teaches the heart to find peace in God's presence, not just in his provision. Over time, waiting reshapes perspective. What once felt urgent begins to feel less controlling. Peace grows as trust deepens. The soul learns that God's timing is not careless or cruel, but precise and intentional. When the answer finally comes, it carries clarity and confirmation that it arrived at the right moment. What seems slow in the beginning makes sense in hindsight. Waiting is not wasted time. It is active preparation under the guidance of a wise God. Even when nothing seems to be happening on the surface, God is working beneath it all. He is strengthening, aligning, and equipping you for what lies ahead. When you understand that waiting is preparation, not punishment, the season changes from frustration to faith, and patience becomes a place of growth rather than despair. Explain 5 keynote into 800 words, and Don adds subheading. Worry has a powerful way of shaping perception. It does not simply make a problem feel uncomfortable. It enlarges it until it fills the entire field of vision. When worry takes hold, the mind becomes fixed on what is wrong, what could go wrong, and what might never work out. The more attention the problem receives, the larger and more intimidating it appears. At the same time, God slowly fades into the background, not because he has moved, but because focus has shifted. This is how worry magnifies problems while shrinking the awareness of God's power. The human mind is naturally drawn to threats. When something feels uncertain or dangerous, attention locks onto it as a survival instinct. Worry feeds this instinct, keeping the mind in a constant state of alert. Thoughts begin to circle. You're around the same issue repeatedly, rehearsing fears and imagining worst-case outcomes. Over time, the problem becomes distorted. It is no longer just a challenge, it feels like an unstoppable force. The more this cycle continues, the harder it becomes to remember that God is greater than the situation. This narrowing of focus has spiritual consequences. When the problem dominates attention, prayer becomes strained. Faith feels fragile. Hope feels unrealistic. God's past faithfulness is forgotten, and his promises feel distant. It is not that God has changed, but that worry has reduced him in our perception. A small view of God leads to a large view of problems. The situation begins to feel heavier than the one who promised to carry burdens. Worry also isolates the problem from its proper context. Instead of seeing it as one moment in a larger story, worry presents it as the final chapter. It convinces the mind that this challenge defines the future, that nothing beyond it exists. This is why worry feels suffocating. It traps the heart in the present fear and blocks the ability to imagine redemption, growth, or resolution. God, however, always sees the full picture. What feels overwhelming now is only one piece of a much larger plan. When focus shifts back to God, perspective begins to change. Remembering who God is has a way of shrinking problems back to their proper size. His power, wisdom, and faithfulness come back into view. The mind recalls past moments when fear once felt just as intense, yet God made a way. This remembrance does not erase the problem, but it repositions it. The problem is no longer central, God is. Faith grows as attention is redirected. Instead of asking how big the problem is, the heart begins to reflect on how great God is. This shift does not deny reality, it reframes it. The situation may still be difficult, but it is no longer all company. Assuming God's presence creates space for hope and peace even before circumstances change. When God is seen clearly, problems lose their power to dominate thoughts. Worry thrives on repetition, but so does faith. Just as fear grows through repeated focus on the problem, trust grows through repeated remembrance of God's character. Each time the mind returns to truth, God's faithfulness, his promises, his unchanging nature, the grip of worry weakens. Over time, the heart learns a new pattern. Instead of spiraling into fear, it turns toward trust. This shift in focus also affects emotional and physical well-being. Worry tightens the body and exhausts the mind. Faith brings rest. When God is magnified, the nervous system begins to calm and the heart finds steadiness. Peace does not come because the problem is gone, but because it is no longer the highest authority in the mind. God takes that place. Magnifying God does not mean ignoring responsibility or refusing to take action. It means acting from a place of trust rather than fear. Decisions made under worry are often rushed, reactive, and driven by panic. Decisions made under faith are thoughtful, grounded, and guided by wisdom. When God is at the center, clarity replaces confusion, and courage replaces anxiety. Over time, choosing to magnify God reshapes the inner life. The soul becomes less easily shaken by uncertainty. Challenges are approached with confidence rather than dread. This does not mean worry never tries to return, but it no longer controls the narrative. Each new challenge becomes an opportunity to practice focus and trust again. When problems are magnified, God feels distant. When God is magnified, problems feel manageable. The difference lies not in the size of the situation, but in where attention rests. Worry will always attempt to pull focus toward fear, but faith intentionally lifts the eyes toward God. As this practice becomes habitual, peace grows deeper. Resilience strengthens, and the heart learns to rest in the reality that no problem is ever bigger than the God who holds it. Peace is often misunderstood as the absence of trouble, the moment when everything finally settles and life becomes predictable. Many people believe peace will come after the problem is solved, after the answer arrives, or after circumstances change. But this understanding keeps peace always just out of reach, because life rarely offers long stretches without challenges. True peace is not the result of perfect conditions. It is the result of confident trust in God's presence. It is possible to experience peace even while the problem is still unresolved. When peace depends on circumstances, it is fragile. It rises and falls with every new piece of information, every delay, every unexpected turn. One good day brings relief. One bad day brings anxiety. This kind of peace is exhausting because it requires constant reassurance. God offers a deeper kind of peace, one that remains steady regardless of what is happening on the surface. This peace does not deny reality. It faces reality with confidence that God is involved and in control. Peace before the solution requires a shift in focus. Instead of asking, when will this end? The heart begins to ask, who is with me in this? Awareness of God's presence changes the emotional landscape. The situation may still be difficult, but it no longer feels lonely or overwhelming. Knowing that God is present brings comfort, strength, and reassurance that no moment is wasted and no struggle is unseen. This kind of peace grows when trust replaces the need for immediate answers. Human nature craves resolution. We want clarity, timelines, and guarantees. But God often calls for trust before clarity. Peace is born when the heart accepts that it does not need to know everything to rest. Trusting God's character becomes more important than understanding his methods. When confidence in who God is becomes stronger than anxiety about what will happen, peace takes root. Peace before the problem is solved also changes how challenges are experienced. Instead of reacting with panic, the heart responds with steadiness. Emotions become less extreme and thoughts become less chaotic. There is room to breathe, to think clearly, and to make wise decisions. This inner calm does not come from ignoring the problem, but from believing that the problem does not have the final word. God's peace acts as an anchor in uncertainty. Anchors do not stop the storm, but they prevent drifting. In the same way, peace does not immediately remove hardship, but it keeps the heart grounded. It prevents fear from carrying the mind into imagined disasters and worst-case scenarios. With peace present, hope remains alive even when circumstances are challenging. Experiencing peace in the middle of unresolved situations also strengthens faith. It becomes evidence that trust is not based on outcomes, but on relationship. When peace exists without visible solutions, it testifies that God's presence is enough. This kind of faith is resilient. It does not crumble under pressure because it is rooted in something deeper than changing conditions. His peace also affects relationships and daily life. When anxiety dominates, it spills into conversations, decisions, and interactions. Stress spreads easily. Peace, on the other hand, creates stability. It allows patience, kindness, and wisdom to flow even in difficult seasons. Others begin to notice the difference, not because life is easy, but because there is calm in the midst of difficulty. Peace before the solution arrives requires intentional practice. It involves choosing trust repeatedly, especially when fear tries to resurface. Each anxious thought becomes an invitation to return to confidence in God. Over time, this practice reshapes emotional habits. The heart learns that it does not need to wait for answers to experience rest. This kind of peace does not mean disappointment will never come or that challenges will not hurt. It means that pain will not destroy hope and uncertainty will not erase joy. God's peace creates a safe place within, a place where the soul can rest even while the journey continues. It allows strength to endure and courage to persist. When peace is present before the problem is solved, waiting becomes bearable and struggle becomes purposeful. The heart is no longer desperate for escape. It is anchored in trust. This peace is a gift, freely given, not earned by understanding or control. It flows from the assurance that God is present, faithful, and actively working even when the solution is still on its way. There is a deep discouragement that comes from feeling unfinished, stuck, or left behind. When progress seems slow and answers remain unclear, it is easy to believe that something has gone wrong or that God has moved on. But being in process is not a sign of failure. It is evidence that God is still at work. Process means movement, shaping, and intentional development. If God were finished, there would be no process at all. The very fact that growth is happening, even when it feels uncomfortable, is proof that God has not stopped. Process often feels confusing because it lacks clear markers. There is no visible finish line, no obvious signal that says how long it will last or when it will end. This uncertainty can create frustration and self-doubt. The mind begins to ask why progress feels slower than expected or why others seem to move ahead more quickly. But comparison distorts understanding. God's process is personal and precise. He shapes each life according to its unique purpose, not according to someone else's timeline. In the middle of process, identity is tested. When outcomes are delayed, it is tempting to measure worth by visible success or external validation. Process strips away these measurements and forces the heart to confront deeper questions of trust and purpose. This is where true growth happens. When applause is absent and recognition is minimal, dependence on God becomes clearer. Process teaches the soul to draw strength from faith rather than results. God uses process to align character with calling. Many people desire the outcome without realizing the weight that comes with it. Influence requires humility. Responsibility requires discipline. Blessing requires stewardship. Process develops these qualities gradually, preventing collapse later. What feels slow now is often what prevents damage in the future. God is more concerned with sustainability than speed. Process also exposes areas that need healing or adjustment. Old wounds, habits, and mindsets often surface when movement slows. This exposure is not meant to shame, but to restore. God does not build on weak foundations. He repairs before he elevates. If certain things feel uncomfortable during this season, it may be because God is strengthening places that could not support what is coming next. Being in peace. Process can feel lonely because much of the work is internal. Others may not see the growth taking place. They may misunderstand the season or assume stagnation. But hidden work is still real work. Roots grow unseen before branches expand. Strength is formed quietly before it is demonstrated publicly. God often does his deepest work in private so that what emerges later is genuine and lasting. Process requires patience, but it also builds resilience. Each challenge strengthens endurance. Each delay refines trust. Over time, the heart becomes less shaken by uncertainty and more anchored in faith. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. This resilience is a gift of process. Without it, success would be fragile and easily lost. The danger in process is the temptation to quit prematurely. Frustration can make unfinished work feel pointless, but stopping mid-process interrupts growth. God completes what he begins, but trust is required to stay present in the shaping. Process demands perseverance, not perfection. Progress may be slow, but it is still progress. When perspective shifts, process begins to feel purposeful rather than painful. Instead of asking why the journey is taking so long, the heart begins to ask what is being learned along the way. Gratitude grows for lessons that could not be taught any other way. Strength is recognized where weakness once dominated. This awareness transforms process from an obstacle into a gift. Process is not evidence that God is distant. It is proof that he is intentional. Every stage has meaning. Every delay has purpose. Even confusion has a role in developing trust. When the work is complete, the transformation will be evident not only in what is achieved, but in who the person has become. Understanding that process is proof God is not finished, brings hope back into uncertain seasons. It reminds the heart that growth is happening even when it feels slow. God is shaping, refining, and preparing something meaningful. The story is still being written. As long as there is process, there is purpose. And as long as there is purpose, God is still working. There comes a moment when everything you have heard must move from words into the heart. This is that moment. After every reminder, every truth, every reassurance, one reality stands unshaken. God has never stopped working in your life. Not once. Not even in the silence, not even in the waiting, not even in the confusion. And if that truth has stirred something inside you, if it has lifted even a small weight from your heart, then this message was not accidental. It found you because you needed it. You may still have unanswered questions. You may still be standing in the middle of a process that feels unfinished. But now you know something you didn't fully realize before. You are not alone, and you are not stuck. God is active in ways you cannot yet see. Every delay, every pause, every closed door is part of a greater story still unfolding. When you stop worrying, you make room for trust. When you release fear, you invite peace. When you surrender control, you allow God to reveal his power. Let this truth settle deep within you. Your current season is not the end of the story. What feels heavy today will one day become a testimony. What feels confusing now will eventually make sense. And what feels silent is often the sound of God working behind the scenes. Hold on to that. Return to it when worry tries to creep back in. Speak it over yourself when fear gets loud. God is working. If this message spoke to your heart, don't let it stop with you. There are people around you, friends, family, even strangers, who are quietly battling worry, doubt, and exhaustion. Someone you know needs to hear this same reminder today. Someone needs to know that their waiting is not wasted and their prayers are not ignored. When you share this message, You are not just clicking a button. You are extending hope to someone who may be on the edge of giving up. And if this sermon encouraged you, strengthened your faith, or helped you breathe a little easier, stay connected. Subscribe, not just for content, but for continued reminders of truth when life tries to overwhelm you. This space is about building faith, restoring peace, and reminding hearts that God is still in control. Every message is meant to lift you, guide you, and point you back to hope. Make a decision today to stop feeding worry and start feeding faith. Choose to trust even when you don't understand. Choose to rest even when answers haven't arrived. Choose to believe that God is faithful, consistent, and deeply involved in every detail of your life. Let this not be a one-time moment of encouragement, but the beginning of a mindset shift. Before you leave, take a moment. Reflect on what you heard. Carry it with you into your day. And if it moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, subscribe, stay connected, because the more this message spreads, the more hearts will be reminded of this powerful truth. Stop worrying. God is working.